Senator Warren, thank you.
Thank
you
you
for making your way down here on a busy day, a busy week, unexpectedly busy in some ways. So let's start with the unexpectedly part. We all lived through a bit of an earthquake Tuesday night. A couple of days after the election, you gave a speech to the AFL-CIO and you said this: if we learn nothing else from the past 2 years of electioneering, we should hear the message loud and clear that the American people want Washington to change. It was clear in the Democratic primaries, it was clear in the Republican primaries, it was clear in the campaign, and it was clear on election day. So how do Democrats show that they heard that message? What do they do now?
Well, I think the interesting question is going to be both halves. How are the Democrats going to show it, and how is Donald Trump going to show that he actually heard that message? That's the message he ran on. But right now, what Donald Trump is doing is he's putting together a transition team that is full of lobbyists and the kind of people that he actually ran against. And so part of what we have to assess here is, what is the mandate coming out? And I think that the clearest point that comes out of this election is that the American people do not want Wall Street to run their government. They do not want corporate executives to be the ones who are calling the shots in Washington. And you can shake your head no to that, but I think that is exactly what this election shows. It shows, look at the polling from this, that about 3/4 of all Americans do believe that the game is rigged. And that's Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And they believe it is rigged in favor of the people in this room, and that it is rigged against them and their families and their children. And they want to see change. They want to see that connection between Wall Street and giant corporations and our government broken. They want that not to happen anymore. They want a government that runs for the people. That's what I think this election is about.
So how do the two parties show that? If that's your lesson, what do Democrats do? What does the Trump transition/administration do that it's not doing now, in your estimation?
Well, it doesn't start by hiring a bunch of lobbyists to run the transition. It doesn't start by floating names of people who've run giant hedge funds to be able, or been part of that, to be able to run the Treasury, or people who come from industry to be able to run the regulatory agencies. You know, the American people understand about the revolving door, and I think they're really sick of it. The notion that someone is in industry and makes a bunch of money and then goes into government for a few years regulating the very same industry and then spins right back into industry again.
But you know, elections have consequences, as they say. He won. He gets to pick his administration. Right?
He won, but I'm just making the point. You better take a look at what he won on. He did not win on a Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, business as usual, what can we do to help the giant corporations in America? Look, I know that the K Street lobbyists are absolutely out there salivating. You know, they're dancing in the streets. They say, this is our big chance. We're going to get to slash regulations. Man, look for a tax cut for those at the top. That's what the K Street lobbyists may be thinking this morning, but that is not what the people who elected Donald Trump are thinking this morning.
If you look at the populist part of the Trump message, one would think, and I think you've talked about this, there are things where, frankly, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump started together and proceeded together. Trade, Wall Street, as you said, college costs, child care, infrastructure spending. Is there a place there on any of those or all of those subjects where populists in the Democratic Party and a Trump administration can come together? Can you see that happening now?
Well, the question, I mean, this just keeps going back to, what is Donald Trump going to do? It's been a week, and he's now given us at least the first tangible sign of his vision of how to run a Trump presidency. And a big part of that are lobbyists and Washington insiders. And the other part of it is to bring someone who is a white supremacist into the White House to be a senior strategist. And I think this is going to be an important part of the mix going forward. You know, what Donald Trump is doing right now is that there was a lot, let's face it, there was a lot during the election of a toxic stew of bigotry and attacks on Americans all across this country. And that Donald Trump started his campaign with an attack on Mexican Americans, and then he rode the escalator down. And he did attacks on women, he did attacks on African Americans, he did attacks on Muslims, he did attacks on immigrants, he did attacks on people with disabilities. I mean, it was kind of everybody who didn't look like the people who showed up at his rallies. And there were a lot of people who were attracted to that, but there were a lot of people who were not attracted to that and yet voted for Donald Trump. There are a lot of people who didn't like that part of what the campaign was about, but they said, we want somebody who's going to shake it up. But one of the first things Donald Trump has now done is he has brought Steve Bannon in as a senior strategist. This is a man who has white supremacist ties. I mean, that's what he does. This is a man who told his ex-wife that he didn't want his children going to school with Jews. This is a man who ran a news organization that ran headlines like, would you rather your children have feminism or cancer? This is a man who says, by his very presence, that this is a White House that will embrace bigotry. And, you know, here I am with the business leaders of America, and I just want to underline something that every one of you know. Bigotry is bad for business. Bigotry is not what your employees expect. Bigotry is not what your customers expect. And if that's the direction that this administration goes, that creates a real problem for everybody. And what I believe about this is there's no longer the possibility on this question of someone like Bannon in the administration of where Donald Trump goes next. I don't think it's possible to stand on the sidelines and be quiet about this. There are a lot of people in this room who helped lead the charge to make workplaces open and accepting places, to say we're open to all customers. We want to make sure that we serve all Americans, that we treat everybody with dignity and respect. If this White House goes in a different direction, that damages every one of us. And I think it calls on the business community for leadership. I think it calls on the Democrats for leadership. But I think that's the problem we've got, and one of the ones we're going to have to deal with going forward here. We can't ignore this.